Hi again, I'm Dr. Martin Rutherford, a functional medicine practitioner here in Reno, Nevada. This is my partner in crime, Dr. Randall Gates.
A board-certified chiropractic neurologist.
And together we do, we've started putting these broadcasts on a while ago to share our experiences with chronic pain patients, what seems to work, what doesn't seem to work, trying to put things in perspective for the person who is searching for specific topics. Today's topic is going to be mitochondrial dysfunction as it relates to chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia. And I'd like to kind of set this up a little bit. This is a really good topic. I was just talking to Dr. Gates before we started the broadcast. We spent one day at one seminar basically listening to lectures on mitochondrial dysfunction all day, so we understand why it's being searched on the internet. And one of the things we like to do during these broadcasts is to try to put things in perspective for people. I was also talking to Dr. Gates about the fact that we need to do a broadcast on these pamphlets that are coming out that are telling you. The latest one I saw was yesterday from Dr. Whitaker, and Dr. Whitaker's pamphlet said this is the cure for diabetes and lipids, and it's Berberine. And then I saw one a couple of weeks ago, and it was don't listen to these doctors who tell you got to get off of gluten, just take this pill and save yourself a lot of money, and you can take this pill and eat it, and you can eat pasta and all this type of stuff. I don't know how they get away with that type of advertising, and certainly the pill is a pill that has an enzyme in it that eats up essentially
Lectins, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, that eats up so that you don't get the gluten reaction supposedly, but there's so much more to it than that. In both of those situations, in other situations, when you get those pamphlets, you know, buy this supplement and that's going to be it. Mitochondrial function is becoming more popular. I have an acquaintance who is in the field who's literally crafted his entire practice around treating mitochondrial function. It's legitimate. Mitochondria have a huge impact on chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, pretty much your physiology in general. However, one of the things we're going to point out is that it's a part of a greater picture. It's certainly a significant part, and you're gonna see these. You're probably going to see a mitochondrial supplement. Where I was going with all that.
Right.
Come out in one of these magazines pretty soon, or some pamphlet in your mail saying, "Buy this, and you'll have energy, and your pain will go away," and all this type of stuff. And one of the services we're hoping to perform today is to kind of give you a little bit better perspective on why that might work for a handful of the people that purchase these products in isolated fashion, but why you're probably going to be throwing your money away if you're not looking at everything that will address mitochondrial function. Now, I've used that term a ton of times here. It's kind of an important player in our physiology. It's an organ. Well, it's not an organ. It's kind of it's an organelle that takes up half of your cell in mass, and it's pretty significant to your metabolism and your ability to create a balance, what's called homeostasis, the balance in your body, that if you had it, you probably wouldn't be watching this because you'd probably be feeling pretty good. So I'm going to start to defer to Dr. Gates. Once again, he has done the significant part of research on this. This is something we utilize in our treatments as part of a greater project, a greater protocol for many of our cases, but it seems to be particularly apropos for the chronic fatigue and the fibromyalgia patients. So we're going to go ahead with that. So why don't we start off with what are mitochondria? What are mitochondria, other than they take up half of our cell and they're really important? What are mitochondria, and what do they do, and why is it that everybody's starting to get so enamored with it, and why is it looking like the research is showing it's looking like it's going to become an important player in solving chronic problems, particularly fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue?
I would say because the mitochondria are an easy target. Everybody going through biochemistry really learns how the mitochondria function. We have classes upon classes, no matter what discipline you're involved in, regarding how the body makes energy. And the mitochondria is basically where that happens, for the most part. And so relative to what the mitochondria do, they produce our energy, but more importantly, the supplement industry can take advantage of the mitochondria. Meaning, you have all heard of alpha lipoic acid, CoQ10, you've heard of other lipid replacement supplements, and a lot of them are really good. However, just like anything, we have capitalism here in America, so people are in part trying to make a buck, and that is why the mitochondria really get a lot of emphasis. Now, from a clinical standpoint, like you talked about the colleague who you have an acquaintance with, mitochondrial therapies work.
Yeah.
From lipid replacement therapy to high-dose vitamin supplementation to ozone treatments, things of that nature. These things can help our body to make more energy, which can cause someone with chronic fatigue to feel better. However, what we're going to talk about today is the complexity of why the mitochondria really start to dysfunction.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough. So in essence, there are pathways that use a variety of vitamins and chemical entities that create a situation in which the mitochondria can function and create this energy, and that's what Dr. Gates is referring to relative to that pathway, using these different things, the CoQ10, the lipoic acid, I think B vitamin, some other, there's a bunch of different things in this pathway that gives us this energy. And so again, we're not anti-vitamin or anti-drug, vitamin or pro-drug. What we're just trying to say is that again, I'll use another example. I was reading a book by a gentleman who appears to have a fairly decent grasp on Lyme disease and chronic diseases, and he was making the point of how he calls it a multi-infectious disease symptomatic. In other words, there's many different moving pieces to these diseases that we're talking about, Lyme disease and all chronic diseases, and to broadcast that you can correct it with one supplement. I had a gentleman in here last night was looking for one supplement. He wanted one. I had two here yesterday. One was looking for a supplement for the thyroid. The other one was looking for a supplement for his testosterone. And that's not the way we work. That's not the way the body works. If you want a long-term response in these treatments, you need to understand what we're about to talk about relative to chronic fatigue and the multi-factors that go into chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia, which we've talked about in other broadcasts that we've had. So you're welcome to look them up on powerhealthtalk.com. There'll be some similarities, but we're going to really hit the mitochondria here. So one of the things that can affect mitochondria negatively, even if you're taking the supplements, are chronic bacterial and viral infections. Mm-hmm. And we see a lot of those. One of the local alternative medical practitioners said to one of our patients, apparently before she came here the other day, oh, that's Rutherford and his over-the-top blood testing panel. Our over-the-top blood testing panel is a panel that is put together to basically figure out pretty much everything that could possibly be affecting that person. With
it's a good thing testing. To be known for.
Yeah,
I like that.
Yeah, that's what it was. That's what she said. She's an over-the-top blood test. In our over-the-top blood testing panel, we test for antibodies that people don't test for in general, but we also test for viral infections. And everybody that comes in here for a variety of reasons, this being one of them. I would like you to kind of maybe take that and run with it.
Yeah, and I think a perfect point relates to Reno. Actually, we had an alternative practitioner here who invested quite a bit of money with a partner up at the university for a building. Yeah. And they were in essence trying to say one virus or a couple viruses cause chronic fatigue. and it turns out there was kind of a big uproar about it. I don't want to say anything else for.
Well, I was doing lectures at the time on it, and I remember people were coming to me when I was doing lectures on fibromyalgia in person, not like this, and I had people attacking me with it. And I said, I'm going to tell you right now, this is going down the toilet. This is going down the tubes. It's not going to happen because there is not one cause of fibromyalgia or chronic fatigue. There are numerous causes. One of the things we talked about was, yes, viruses can be a part of the symptomatic picture, but it is never, let me repeat, never the only thing for chronic fatigue. We have the Epstein-Barr virus doctor here in Incline. When I say the doctor who brought Epstein-Barr virus to the forefront as the cause of chronic fatigue. And I think even his, when I look at his notes now, when I get patients from there, I think he's even changed his idea on that because he seems to be going in other directions.
Yeah, and I feel bad for him because I think he's gotten beaten up more than he should have.
Right.
But by the same token, I applaud him because he did bring it to the forefront.
Exactly.
And we're going to cite a lot of literature today from Garth Nicholson, who is also a microbiology researcher relative to chronic disease, and he's brought up the concepts of mycoplasma relative to fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue and a number of other intracellular infections. So you can reference him. Now, just like the doctor that we're talking about, anytime somebody comes up with one of these outside-the-box paradigms, they have a tendency to take some heat. And so Dr. Garth Nicholson, we love him. We love his stuff, but he has taken some heat because he's shown some associations between some vaccinations that may have been given to a certain group of people and certain intracellular infections. So he's kind of, yeah, he's kind of a
in one of our
controversial figure, so to speak, but we appreciate the literature that he produced. And so in going with the concept of chronic bacterial and chronic viral infections relative to mitochondrial function, in essence what is being observed is that certain bacteria like Mycoplasma, it's kind of a pseudobacteria because it can actually go inside of our cells and use our mitochondria to make energy for itself, as well as viruses can do that same thing, as well as chronic bacterial infections can cause this inflammation in our cells, and that inflammation has been shown to cause the mitochondria not to work as well. And Dr. Garth Nicholson started doing these experiments with this substance called rhodamine, which doesn't matter what it's called, it just fluoresces the mitochondria. So you can see how intact the outside of the mitochondria is, and he observed that in patients with chronic fatigue, the mitochondria had broken down. And that's really a big finding for all of you chronic fatigue
sufferers. And mitochondria,
sufferers.
For those of you who aren't familiar with it yet, I'll repeat, creates energy.
Make your energy. So if you don't have any energy,
it makes ATP.
This is important.
It makes ATP, better known as energy. No energy. Chronic fatigue is usually multiple different things too, but this is almost always a player.
So yeah, and so that's a big part of it. So we're going to go into later on about treating just the bacteria, treating just the mitochondria, the outside of the mitochondrial membrane, but for now.
And you talked about Mycoplasma, and it looks like we're going to talk about that a little bit later.
Yeah.
For those of you who are not familiar with Mycoplasma, I have my whole. For those of you who haven't watched these things, I got into this because I have a whole symptomatic picture. There was a variety of reasons I got into this, but it all kind of came together. And I have Hashimoto's thyroiditis, I have celiac. I was, ultimately had the overwhelming, kind of fatigue, if you will, and the fibromyalgia, the light. Mine wasn't severe, but mine was pretty more pain, kind of an aches and stuff like that, and kind of a light sensitivity all over the place. Anyway, it all started with an overwhelming pneumonia infection. And those of you who have pneumonia may be very familiar with Mycoplasma because people are looking for Mycoplasma. And it occurs in a pretty good percentage of people with pneumonia, or everybody.
Not everybody. I mean, it's one type of pneumonia, and it causes the walking pneumonia where somebody can go on for a long time. But the interesting thing with Mycoplasma is that there's many species. And you may get pneumonia and you may get Mycoplasma in remote areas of your body like the nervous system.
Okay, so it can be responsible for a lot of these symptoms that I had and that many of you still are probably suffering from. So we'll probably be talking about that a little bit later. But if you, so back to the topic, mitochondrial dysfunction as it relates to chronic fatigue. You have viral infections, you have bacterial infections. They tend to break down the ability of the mitochondria to work. Fatigue is a tough one. I mean, there is like 2 pages worth of symptoms or diseases that cause the symptom of fatigue. And there's probably 2 pages of diagnostic tools that you can use to try to determine what's causing that fatigue. And if you don't have an organized way of going about it by taking a history, good luck. Dr. Gates and I spend about 3 hours working up every chronic pain patient that walks in here. And I have to tell you, I think we're not dummies. I mean, we kind of do this for a living. That's what it takes, and it takes a history that is so mind-numbingly comprehensive that it can ferret out that 2 pages of what are the potential diseases here, what are the potential, what's your history show, what were the tests show, and what tests need to be done to ferret it down to maybe 2 or 3 or 4 possible causes. So exactly. It's a complex situation, but let's go. So chronic bacteria, chronic viral infections, damaged mitochondria can contribute to chronic fatigue. Chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia tend to go together, and the next kind of natural flow of this would be, okay, we have bacteria, we have viral infections. What about antibiotics and antivirals? Exactly. How do they work? Like the 2 people I had here yesterday, well, doc, is there some natural supplement that I can go get for testosterone? Or I really came here because my thyroid is just off and I want a pill for it. Even though I'm taking 25 different pills, I want to know what pill you have. That's not how you treat a thyroid that doesn't respond to pills. If one of these patients had this, they probably would say, well, then should I go take an antibiotic or an antiviral? How do antibiotics and antivirals fit into this?
They fit in from the perspective, like a lot of Lyme's disease patients.
We're not medical doctors, but we work with medical doctors, and we have to evaluate the medical aspect of these cases versus to what we're doing, versus to what we're using relative to supplements and so on and so forth.
So in our clinical observation and seeing patients who receive chronic antibiotic therapy, sometimes it can be very beneficial, but the problem is lots of times once the antibiotic therapy is removed, then the person tends to crash. In other instances, people are on chronic antibiotic therapy and they don't feel any better. I mean, that's a realistic fact of the matter as well. So you can try and suppress these infections, but it's really tough. And another thing we have to keep in mind is that lots of times it's not just Lyme's disease. It's not just Mycoplasma. Dr. Gardner-Nicholson, I got to credit him, he has figured out that lots of times there are 7 different infections in your cells at one time. So designing a regimen of a couple antibiotics can be really difficult, or a couple antivirals. And so that is where the whole chronic bacterial and chronic viral infection hypothesis falls down for some researchers, because again, in medical research, they like to say, okay, well, we have a bacterial infection, we should be able to treat it with antibiotics and the person should feel better. But the mechanisms are so much more complex than that for chronic fatigue patients. You alluded to it. We did a whole talk on chronic fatigue, and we went over 8 major systems that can be involved. This is just one of them, the mitochondria. And so relative to all of that, if you do have chronic bacterial and chronic viral infections, you can eliminate those bacteria or those viruses potentially, but your mitochondrial membrane may still be completely screwed up. And you also can then remove the antibiotic or the antiviral, but then because the immune system is so messed up, and it allowed those bacteria and viruses to settle in your cells, then as soon as you remove that therapy, then the viruses and bacteria come in and they start having a party again, because your immune system is basically incompetent to get rid of those things. And the
cell wall is damaged.
Yeah.
So I hope this isn't getting too complex, but this is just the way that it is. People need to understand that we're talking to those of you who've been here, then there, then here. I call it nibbling. I tried this. I tried the mitochondrial stuff. It didn't work for me. It worked for me for a little while. It didn't work. I went and did food allergies, and the tests. All of these things that get into fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue are legitimate, but you have to understand everybody's different. Mitochondrial function is probably involved in most, if not all, of these conditions, but as Dr. Gates said, it's one of maybe 8 different major areas that need to be addressed in these types of cases. Going with the fact that this cell has a cell wall that keeps it intact, and that cell wall has to let things in and out of it so that these nutrients can get into the cell to create these effects so that you can make the energy. If the cell wall gets damaged, you can't process hormone. You can't do anything. I mean, the whole communication system between the cell and your nervous system, the cell and your biochemistry breaks down into varying degrees. The cell wall is made of something called a phospholipid, fatty cells, cholesterol. For you cholesterol freaks who want your cholesterol to be below 100, you will have poor cell wall function. Probably under 150, you will have poor cell wall function. I'm mentioning that because now a lot of doctors are going, we want it under 150. You don't want it under 150 because at the very least you want your cell walls to have a chance of recovering. So that brings us to lipid replacement therapy, which is done for that specific reason. Cell walls break down. They are made of phospholipids. I will,
exactly, and as we discussed,
some of the current treatments are that our acquaintances do is antibiotics, antivirals, and lipid replacement therapy.
Exactly. With lipid replacement therapy, like we talked about with the rhodamine, in that it's a fluorescent dye, so you can inject it into cells and then look under a microscope and really tell how the mitochondrial membrane is functioning. Is it intact or is it not intact? And so Dr. Garth Nicholson, again, figured this one out. Got to give him credit. He has done studies where he has given patients lipid replacement therapy and shown that he can restore the integrity of the mitochondrial membrane. Now,
just had him eat a lot of egg yolks.
we do use his supplement NT Factor. I will give that supplement props. It does help. It does help. And it has been shown to basically improve chronic fatigue by 43% over 2 months. And so I think that's where he was seen, because he was working with doctors who were doing the chronic antibiotic and chronic viral treatments. And then he noticed that he could get an improvement just with lipid replacement therapy. Now, I will say clinically in our observation, yes, NT Factor helps, but again, it's not the whole picture, because you have to look at the immune system. You have to look at how the gut is interfacing with the immune system. You have to look at how heavy metals are interplaying with the entire human body. There's just so many different factors, but lipid replacement therapy is one, and I think it is something worth mentioning. I think it is effective.
Yeah, I can speak from personal experience.
Yeah,
it was a long haul for me. I was kind of one of the guinea pigs for figuring this stuff out, at least around here. And my pains and aches and joints and all that type were moderate. Some mornings they were really rough, where I felt like I couldn't get out of bed. But my energy, I would describe it as it's just like a profound fatigue. It was just like moving through sand or water. There were days where I'd exercise and oh my God, and I found out that exercising really hard wasn't a good thing to do. So that's part of it. Actually, that's the whole thing that we should do, by the way, on exercise, because I have too many people coming in here who want to exercise their way out of this, which is a great thing, but they over-exercise and it crashes them because none of this stuff is working on them. What got my energy back was finding what my food allergies were, finding out that I was cross-sensitive to certain grains, quinoa, all of you who go from one grain to the next, finding out that I had intestinal permeability, finding out that I had small intestinal bacterial over and with me, we went one step at a time, so I could really see if there was a change in things or not. I've had low blood sugar literally for my whole life, I realized, and I would have profound tiredness that was getting better with taking care of each one of these entities, but I would still have these drops during the day. Then once I started eating that specific shake that I do about every 2.5 to 3 hours, that went away. I am taking this NT Factor, and I'm taking it because I do think that it's helping me. Now I'll make another comment. I'm also taking the glutathione, and I must say I'm not sure whether that's helping me or not, but I'm taking it because as someone who has a couple of autoimmune problems, I have celiac and Hashimoto's. In theory, you can't make glutathione. People who have autoimmune problems don't make glutathione. That's me. Now, don't run out there and get all of that, because you could have heavy metal problems in which your metals are binding to your antibodies. There's so many things. I'm just telling you that. But this mitochondrial thing is something that people are searching. We want you to know about it. We want you to know about it in perspective to, is this the dual approach that you were talking about? The working with the...
the dual approach is really doing the antibiotic therapies with the lipid replacement therapy. That's the dual approach in and of itself. But just as you're alluding to, again, things can get so much more complex. We have one patient right now who has chronic viral infections. Her viral antibodies to several viruses, keep in mind, were off the charts. So it's not just an Epstein-Barr virus problem or an XMRV virus problem. She has hypothyroidism with low active thyroid hormone. She has Hashimoto's thyroiditis, which is an immune system condition against the thyroid, which is being shown to be the cause for a lot of hypothyroid patients. But that immune inflammation is also being observed to be associated with fibromyalgia and other fatigue-related syndromes. And so she has all that, and she has adrenal failure, or let me say it this way, functional adrenal fatigue, because she's been under stress for a long period of time. So we've had to do several things to get her, and she has one of the worst leaky gut syndromes that we've ever seen.
So everything I mentioned for me and everything you mentioned for her, in and of themselves, can cause
fatigue.
That's the point. That's the point I want to bring out of this. Dr. Gates will continue to drill you on mitochondrial function, but I really think that's kind of the takeaway point.
It is, and you know, one interesting aspect of her history is that she felt better taking B vitamins.
Right.
She felt better. Did she feel perfect? No, she felt a little better. And that's really all of you out there watching this broadcast who have chronic fatigue. You maybe take some B vitamins, you maybe take some CoQ10, and you feel a little bit better.
And why do those two make them feel better?
And they make you feel better because they help your mitochondrial membrane get more intact. Exactly. And that's where Dr. Nicholson, in pioneering this lipid replacement therapy model with his proprietary NT factor, it works because it helps the mitochondrial membrane. But again, what we're talking about is correcting all these other factors, these 8 different things that can be associated with.
Even the presentation that we saw from Dr. Nicholson was in the framework of an entire week of seminars that talked about all these.
And I'm not meaning to denigrate him and saying that he's not addressing the gut and things like that. I'm just saying for all of you out there, because people tend to research just as you're saying, oh, it's all about the mitochondria. Several alternative practitioners.
No, he's the one who did the research that brought that piece of the puzzle to the forefront, which is necessary.
And we're not saying that he is inattentive to the gut.
I didn't mean to imply that.
I just want to be very specific.
So
and that goes all back to one cause, one disease. And they talked about this extensively at the International Conference on Human Nutrition and Functional Medicine, where we like to say, okay, well, we get cholera in our gut, and then we get 3 days of diarrhea, and then you're fine. You know, there's one organism, there's one disease. Well, chronic disease is way more complex than that, and lots of times there can be 1 to 7 chronic infections associated with mitochondrial dysfunction, associated with immune system dysregulation, because the immune system allowed all this stuff to happen in the first place. Then we associate that with gastrointestinal barrier issues, with food sensitivities, with small intestinal bowel overgrowth. It goes on and on and on. So that's what we wanted to say there. Now we can go into some more specifics as well relative to chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia patients. Just know that Dr. Nicholson has shown that many of you, in a significant percentage, will have Mycoplasma. You may have chlamydia, not the chlamydia that's associated with sexually transmitted diseases, but it's a different form of chlamydia. Borrelia, which is Lyme's disease, human herpes virus 1, 6, and 7. That can be found in the British Journal of Medical Practitioners in 2009. So it was a great, great, great study. Did you have anything you want to comment on that? Should I keep going?
Go ahead.
And so then he also showed that Mycoplasma can be seen in a significant percentage of not only chronic fatigue syndrome, but also fibromyalgia patients, but also rheumatoid arthritis patients, also Lyme's disease patients, and also amyotrophic lateral sclerosis patients, Lou Gehrig's disease, so to speak. And I looked at the literature last night on Lou Gehrig's relative to Mycoplasma, where a team of researchers, after Dr. Nicholson came out with this finding, they said, okay, well, let's give them antibiotics and let's see how they do. And they didn't see any improvement. So they said, the Mycoplasma thing is just a bunch of bunk. But again, it demonstrates it's not a bunch of bunk. What it demonstrates is that there are so many complex mechanisms. Right. And you may have Mycoplasma and you may get rid of the Mycoplasma, but the other mitochondrial deficits and other energy-producing deficits within the nervous system of a Lou Gehrig's patient also have to be addressed. And yeah, we'll admit it's a complex process. No one has figured out Lou Gehrig's yet. But I applaud Dr. Nicholson for walking out there and saying, hey, this is what I see. Just like he saw it with autistic patients. He saw a significant percentage of autistic patients in the LA basin, Los Angeles, so to speak, had Mycoplasma, whereas healthy controls did not. So he said, what's going on? He also said that they had a lot of chlamydia and human herpes virus 6. So it's very, very interesting. He also showed the same thing with MS patients. And yeah, I think that's what I have to say on that topic. Those are the finer points. That's the finer details. We attached a bunch of articles. If you want any of these other articles, we can get them to you. Just request them at powerhealthtalk.com.
Yeah, I think that, again, I think the takeaway message is, and what we try to do here is to present the challenges that I faced somewhat as a patient. I was fortunate that when I finally saw a article or a reference to fibromyalgia, and I contacted this doctor, that he was in the process of, Dr. Johnson was in the process of already developing some understanding of how the nervous system was involved in, we didn't mention that, how the nervous system is involved in all of this. And I was fortunate enough to be exposed to his work. I started to utilize it myself, and I was surprised to see that my balance got better, that my moderate pain levels started to reduce, and I was like, whoa, this is pretty cool. And then he actually ultimately turned me on to a gentleman called Dr. Karazian, who wrote a book called Why Do I Still Have Thyroid Symptoms When My Blood Tests Are Normal? For those of you who like to read. He's also written a new one called Why Isn't My Brain Working? And as with studying with these gentlemen, during a period of time when much of this was not understood, we've had the opportunity to be part of the evolution of the understanding of the complexity of what it takes for a fibromyalgia patient, a chronic fatigue patient, or frankly, just about any other patient who has a chronic problem that just won't go away no matter what you do. I can assure you this is involved. And so, we have the one cause, one disease mentality in this country. I was reading a good book on Lyme disease and chronic disease, and I think it's called Why Won't You Get Well? And now the author's name is going to
Dr. Horowitz.
Dr. Horowitz from back on the East Coast. And I mention it because I feel like a comrade in arms with him. I've never spoken to him, but same thing. We have a 17-page history that we have patients fill out, because when a patient comes in, you may not think things are important and not tell us unless we give you an outline of everything that could possibly be going on relative to your mitochondrial dysfunction, as well as to your specific condition, being chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia. I would say particularly chronic fatigue, because I mean there's like so many things that can cause chronic fatigue. And then the fact that he is a medical doctor, he's an internist, and he really goes through why the medical model is not going to do this. In his opinion, they're not going to do this. They're not doing it because of the one cause, one disease mentality that was born of Louis Pasteur in the 1800s. Go Louis, but not for this. But we're still utilizing that. That's what's being taught. He goes into great length that the types of things we're talking about now are not addressed in the medical model. It's because the medical model was pretty much set in the one cause, one disease model, and you can see based on what we're saying, how that is a failed model. We need to go to another seminar. We keep talking about this in one seminar, but they reviewed over 2,000 peer-reviewed references in that seminar. Each book that I just got done telling you about has probably 500 peer-reviewed references in it. I mean, there is staggering amounts of evidence out there to back up what Dr. Gates is referencing here in his research, and what we have come to put together as a pretty solid model for evaluating all of these in every patient, because you have to treat the patient, not the diagnosis. So when you start getting into people who you start calling people and you start finding people who treat these things, try to see if you can find out if they're looking at it from more of a global perspective, if they're looking at it from the fact, I mean, if they come in and you sit down and you talk to them for 15 minutes and they don't do an exam, or they do a little exam, or they don't do any exam, and then they start ordering a lot of tests, you start looking for someone else. You need to start looking elsewhere. And a lot of people who are having fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue problems are in that boat where you've been through that. So that's why I'm bringing this to the forefront. We'll continue to go through the different pieces of chronic pain and chronic pain that we have found to be relevant to actually producing results in patients in the framework of a wider understanding of what needs to be evaluated and what needs to be treated in that particular patient to help to resolve these matters. And they most of the time they can be substantially improved. I feel pretty normal most of the time now. I'd like to have that much more energy, maybe that much more energy, but I feel pretty good. I feel pretty good. So if I can get there, I know most people can get there. Most of our patients get there. So we're just trying to share these clinical pearls with you, so you have a little bit better idea how to read the data out there, the studies that come out that say this is good for mitochondrial function, and then you go out and buy a bunch and it doesn't work. So that's kind of my hope that you get out of this broadcast. So anything else? You pretty much covered it?
I think we covered it, and I think I like how you summarized that there, and I also think of how, the marrying of two disciplines. My training was in neurology, and what we see in neurology is that, yes, we can activate the brain. That's what we do here in terms of chiropractic neurology. It's also termed functional neurology. But as is so common in many neurological illnesses, and we could maybe even tie in fibromyalgia with that and watch some of our other videos, is that these underlying causes of the immune system of the mitochondria need to be addressed as well. And if you marry those two disciplines, we are seeing some really, really cool things.
And in our world, actually, you could say three, because we do work with a couple of pretty cool
absolutely.
Osteopaths that are pretty conversant in this field, and intervention is required, which I'd say maybe 20% of our patients, a lot of our patients come here and it's like, I want to take it. I had one yesterday. We had one that wanted to take thyroid medication or whatever it took. They would get it out with no effort whatsoever. And then another one was like, I don't want to take thyroid medication. And this gal's got all of this and more. And she may end up needing some. She sounds like she's got Hashimoto. She may end up needing about 20% time. I think we have to get involved with some medical interventions as one of the many things that we do. So I like to throw that in. Working with the brain, working with the general functional abnormalities and biochemistry of the body, and in certain cases when that has crapped out or when the natural stuff doesn't work, sometimes you need to go in there with a more aggressive approach, get rid of it, and then move back onto the natural approach. And we have found that to be the most complete approach. We don't know if there's a better one out there, but it's working for us. So hopefully you got some good data out of this. If you have any more questions on this, you can look to our website, powerhealthtalk.com. You're welcome to email us at the same place.
Powerhealthtalk.com. There's a comment area.
Okay, there's a comment area, and Dr. Gates will answer you.
Or you can go to our Facebook page, our Power Health Facebook page.
Our Power Health Facebook page.
There too.
And I hope this was helpful. We're welcome to any feedback that you have relative to our broadcasts so that we can try to make them more pertinent and more valuable to anybody who's watching them. That's why we're doing this. So I want to thank you for clicking on us, watching us, whatever it is that people do to see us. And we will see you again next week with hopefully another interesting topic relative to these chronic situations.
Thanks for watching.